For over 1,000 days, China's borders have been closed to the world, and its population has suffered through lockdowns. China's zero-COVID policy, Xi Jinping's response to the virus, mostly kept the pandemic at bay, saving lives. But by the end, it had become a waking nightmare for many.
Residents attempting to cut metal chains, trying to break free from lockdown.
In an eastern district of the city, officers were forcing people out of their rented apartments.
That policy was scrapped in early December. Since then, COVID-19 has ravaged the population.
This Shanghai hospital is one of the best in the country, and it's overwhelmed by the current surge in COVID cases.
Right now in China, things look grim. Tens of millions of people are catching the virus, hospitals are overwhelmed, more than 1 million people might die as a result of this latest outbreak.
Xi's sudden policy reversal will have deadly consequences for the people of China. But as he opens the country for business with the rest of the world, his actions will have a profound global impact.
China's reopening will be 2023's biggest economic event. I'm Rachna Shanbog, The Economist's Business Affairs Editor, and here are my 3 key takeaways on what China's reopening means for the world economy. China's economy suffered during the zero-COVID policy, and that was probably one reason why the policy was increasingly untenable for China's leadership. Some economists think that by the first quarter of 2024, China's GDP might be 10% bigger than it is expected to be in the first 3 months of this year. Outside of China, reopening will have positive and negative effects. One thing to look at is tourism. For countries that rely heavily on Chinese tourism, reopening will be very welcome news. Tourists will start to go out and about again. And for a place like Hong Kong, that will mean a big boost in GDP. Economists think it might rise by about 8% once China fully reopens. Although countries in the West are starting to place travel restrictions on Chinese tourists, that won't affect their economies as much as they're less reliant on Chinese tourist spending. But what will affect the West is another unfortunate side effect of China reopening. China's a big consumer of the world's commodities. It buys about 1/5 of the world's oil and 3/5 of the world's iron ore. And as China starts to grow faster, it starts to demand more of those commodities, which pushes up the global price. Oil, for example, Goldman Sachs, a bank, thinks that full Chinese reopening might lead to prices rising by about a quarter, compared with today's prices up to $100 a barrel. Now, that's not as bad as it was during the spike soon after Russia invaded Ukraine, but it's still an extra complication as central banks try to fight inflation. There's an extra complication for Europe, which is trying to wean itself off Russian natural gas. That's meant relying more on imported liquefied natural gas. And if China recovers very strongly, it might start to demand more LNG as well. That will make it harder for Europe to secure the supplies that it needs. And according to some forecasters, in a scenario where winter starts punctually at the end of this year, Europe might find itself having to introduce rationing. The draconian implementation of zero-COVID and then the chaotic reopening has had the effect of putting some foreign companies off the idea of relying so much on China for their production. Some have started to shift their operations elsewhere. According to some measures, foreign investment into new factories in China have fallen. Apple, for example, has shifted some of its production out of China to Vietnam and India, partly because of some of the chaos of operating during the final days of the zero-COVID policy. So perhaps one of the big questions after China's fully reopened is how quickly that trust is won back, and whether China manages to woo foreign investors and business people back again.